Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, July 19th, 2020, and today I'm going to be talking about vote by mail, essentially absentee voting for the 2020 presidential election. So back in 2016, 1 in 4 votes cast in the presidential election were done by mail. This is typically done by people who do not have access getting to the polling station, people that may be working that day, or have issues with getting to the polling stations. Generally, the older population does vote by mail, not in an overall majority, but a lot of the votes do tend to come from senior citizens. And, when we talk about the impact this would have on the 2020 election, we actually need to go ahead and take a look at the states that permit vote by mail without an excuse, meaning you don't have to have a viable reason as to why you're needing to vote by mail. If we look at this map, the majority of states allow people to request a mail-in ballot regardless of the reason, meaning they don't need to cite either coronavirus or whatever the reason might be as to why they won't vote in person. There are 175 electoral votes in certain states, some Democrat and some Republican, that will pretty much ask you why you need to vote by mail. And for some cases, I think the issue with having an entirely vote by mail system is that only a few states have completely adopted that. I still think that a lot of states on election day are still going to have open, voting places. And that's going to raise a number of issues of voter suppression. But vote by mail has been feared by both Democrats and Republicans. With a system that typically favors those who cannot get to a ballot, Republicans do have the worry of those who are economically disadvantaged that would typically vote for the Democrats but may not have the time to go to a voting station or may not have the necessary needs to even get to the polling station itself. And Democrats also have to worry about the fact that this would increase turnout amongst the older population, a population that typically votes for the GOP in a pretty significant margin. So when we take a look at the actual data and we take a look at what is discussed about the impact of vote by mail, the general belief is that, the general finding is that universal vote by mail has no impact on partisan turnout or vote share. Essentially, based off of an entire vote by mail system, turnout would be roughly the same amongst Democrats and Republicans. Now, when we're looking at the presidential election map, obviously things might not change just because of the fact that partisan turnout won't change and vote share won't as well. The California 25th Congressional District special election, the reason why the Republicans did so well is not only did they have a little bit of momentum following a year that the Democrats won the House of Representatives, and also with a retirement amongst the Democrats, a forced one essentially, the Republican Party was able to get their voters to vote by mail. A lot of the people who didn't want to necessarily vote in person, were able to send in their ballot, and they made sure of that. I think the Democratic Party and the Republican Party will absolutely be on top of it for the 2020 election. But if we look at the states that you need an excuse in order to vote by mail, this was provided by, I believe, not this website, the Policy 2020 Brookings. It's just an overall, this is the map that I use. I just converted it to a 2020 electoral map one, that way you can go ahead and see the numbers. But if we look at the states that currently have, Democratic leaders or votes for the Democratic Party, we have states such as New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut and New Hampshire and Delaware, and then the rest are for the GOP. Looking at the remaining states, let's go ahead and fix that. I guess most of the states that require you to have an excuse as to why you're voting by mail are Republican states. And I think both parties should find a way to go ahead and make sure that everyone has access to vote by mail. Vote by mail and absentee voting are an absentee ballot are the exact same thing, by the way. There is no difference. But looking at the states that have, Republican leaders and typically vote for the Republican Party, a lot of them have made it so anyone can vote by mail. And I think that's the correct way to go. I think any type of ruling from a court or from a governor that says coronavirus is not a valid reason as to why you shouldn't vote by mail, that's voter suppression in its entire form. That's literally forcing someone to put their health at risk to go ahead and vote. And I understand voting is important, but if there's another option, such as voting by mail, obviously that's the one that should be resorted to, not going out into a crowded polling booth where you're waiting in a line for 6 hours because they only open one polling station in a city of 600,000. Kentucky. But looking at the overall electoral map, again, if nothing is going to really change based off of partisan turnout or vote share, I think the Democrats and Republicans really have nothing to fear. the only reason why vote by mail should be implemented, not should be, but one of the main reasons is because it makes the election a lot safer. And if we want to see increased turnout, I think everyone wants to see that on both sides of the aisle. And especially if turnout is the same, increasing on both sides, I think both parties should be very happy with those numbers. I really think that looking at the states where you do need to provide, obviously coronavirus can be valid in some of these states, but it's going to come down to a point where people will say, coronavirus isn't a valid excuse for an all-mail-in election. For the case of Wisconsin, they still held that Supreme Court election from a ruling from a court, and they ended up losing it. The Republicans ended up losing it, even though they were favored to win that because of expected decreased turnout amongst the Democratic side. I don't think that this entire country will be voting by mail, but if it was, I don't think the electoral map would change much. I understand a lot of people may be expecting Republicans to do better or Democrats to do better. Maybe in these yellow states, we may see some impact on the margins, but all of the states that are in yellow, all of them except for two are swing states. New Hampshire and Texas. These are the only two swing states that are on the presidential level. Obviously, some Senate races are competitive in Alabama and Kentucky, and maybe South Carolina, maybe New Hampshire, a little bit of Texas. But other than that, the rest of the states are safe for their respective parties. And, looking at the impact that this had in 2016, it wasn't obviously entirely vote by mail election, but around 30 million votes, I believe, were cast vote by mail. So around 1 in 4 votes. That's a pretty significant amount. I don't think that the American Postal Service, whatever, will be overloaded by, a number of votes by mail. We're going to see a lot of people voting by mail. We're probably not going to see a lot of in-person turnout. A lot of those exit polls probably will be skewed to the right on Election Day, considering that the majority of the people that believe coronavirus is a real threat are Democrats. And obviously there are Republicans who believe the same way, but there are way more Democrats in terms of partisan composition and as to who believes coronavirus is a big threat. Democrats versus Republicans, there's a very big, difference in that sense. And looking at who will probably turn out on Election Day, if a Democrat can vote by mail, the vote counts just as much as someone who goes in on Election Day and votes. And obviously, there still will be people who vote in person. I don't think America will completely transform into an entirely vote-by-mail system. It may be the safest way and the safest route to go, but you can almost guarantee some people are probably going to sit out the election, and I don't think people want people to not vote in this election. And also, some people may not be used to doing things such as vote by mail. I understand that it could be easier for some, but some people are very used to going into their polling station. They know their polling station at heart. And obviously that might actually change on Election Day. I know the polling stations around me were completely moved just because of the obviously pandemic. So on a primary day in Maryland, we didn't have as many polling stations opened as we normally do. That makes sense. That's just typically how it goes. But look at a number of populous states. If there is, Republicans in power in major cities, they definitely will try to do something that suppresses the vote. Absolutely. Same what Democrats would do if there was a very large Republican city. Obviously, there aren't too many Republican cities. Typically, urban areas favor the Democratic Party. But I do think that that is the only probable issue of voter suppression. I don't think that statewide pushes to suppress the vote are super likely in the 2020 election. I know we saw it in 2018 with states such as Georgia and other elections. I don't think that's a partisan standpoint. I think that's just looking at the data and looking at the areas that were, purged from the voter rolls and people that weren't able to vote on Election Day, whatever the reasons were. Looking at an entirely vote-by-mail system, I think we will probably have some hiccups. I don't think the election will be called for maybe a week just because we do have a lot of votes to count in. If you look at a number of races, New York still has a primary that's contested. I believe New York's 12th congressional district. If we look across the country, Election Day results heavily skewed in favor of the GOP. And then, obviously, as vote by mail came in, the Democrats started to make up the margin. That largely has to do with the fact that Republicans will probably turn out more than Democrats in person. But I think generally the same amount of voters will turn out on both sides, ultimately making the election maybe not as fair as it could be just because there will be a couple of nooks and crannies, but as close as we normally would expect. We definitely could see, obviously a Biden victory or a Trump victory, regardless if we do a completely vote-by-mail system. I don't think America is ready to adopt that. Even though, again, I said it would be the safest measure, I don't think that the states even want to completely do that. A lot of people still want to vote in person. And sure, 30 million people voted by mail in 2016, but you also have the issues of some people who may not know how, who still may not have access to voting, even in that sense. If you're homeless, where would you get the ballot if you couldn't go in? If the offices are closed, a lot of questions would be raised. So a lot of people may still have to vote in person. But overall, looking at this map, I don't think much is going to change in terms of based off the studies that have been released either. I don't think much is going to change based off of the results that we should expect versus the results that we will have if we have a vote by mail system, which is already implemented in a number of states. I actually think there are 4 states, I would like to say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states that have all mail elections, meaning that voters have their ballots mailed to them automatically, so they can vote that way or vote in person. But as you can see, a lot of these gray states don't necessarily have no excuse absentee voting, which means you would need to provide a reason as to why you're voting absentee. I could see some arguments as to why this could be considered voter suppression, but until these states start to decline absentee ballots on the issue of coronavirus, I think that's when we would draw the line and say that's absolutely election. That's not voter fraud, sorry, voter suppression. But until that happens in a number of these states, I don't think we should be saying that's the issue in these gray states. They just may have some policy that needs adjustments for this 2020 election, because I don't think a lot of people expected a pandemic to be occurring during a presidential election year. So that's pretty much it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Please subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. On your screen, there should be a video and then a playlist for my 2020 election analysis. This was a member-decided video, so if you want to know how to join, go ahead and click the join button right next to my subscribe button. It'll tell you everything about it and give you a little bit more information about my channel itself. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.